Detective Lukewarm Mulligan had a limp fedora perched on his head and a coffee stain on his trench coat that was older than his last paid case. Nearly everyone in the precinct recognized him, mostly because they'd all had to pick up some piece of evidence he'd accidentally dropped. Lukewarm had a remarkable track record of tripping over the smallest scraps on a crime scene. Some called him the Tripping Detective, and if anyone asked, he'd say it was a nickname that came with a wink and a nudge. In truth, it embarrassed him, but if he was being honest, he had to admit it was accurate. He was tall and noodle-limbed with feet that seemed too big for his body. His black hair stuck out in various directions, like it was working through its own complicated case. Every morning, he tried smoothing it down with water and cheap gel, but by the time he arrived at the station, the whole affair sprang back up like a lineup of offended cacti. Today, he was sporting his favorite mismatch of burgundy socks, having lost one of the pair in a chase the week before. Lukewarm was a walking hazard sign, but he had an enviable knack for noticing small details. If only he could keep from stumbling onto them. Despite his occasional success, the department considered him unpredictable at best. Even so, Chief Morris assigned him cases that needed a fresh perspective, which was a polite code amongst the officers for wrecking ball approach. There was always the hope that Lukewarm's unorthodox style, mostly involving toppling over crucial clues, would reveal something others had missed. Chief Morris also owed Lukewarm's late father a favor or two, so even though no one else was particularly eager to see him out on the streets, Morris's sense of loyalty held strong. On this bright Monday morning, Lukewarm was summoned to the chief's office without warning. He stubbed his toe on the trash can while entering, then knocked over an entire row of neatly stacked file boxes. The chief pinched the bridge of his nose but maintained a thin smile. "Mulligan," he said, "I need you to keep it together. We've got a bit of a peculiar case." Lukewarm nodded, trying to arrange his arms in a more dignified manner. "There's been a robbery at the Sunnyvale retirement home," the chief continued. "But not just any robbery. Apparently, the residents' prized possessions are turning up missing. And so far, none of the leads make sense." Fixing his hat, Lukewarm asked, "What exactly are we talking about that's missing? Jewelry? Air?" The chief picked up a folder, opened it, and sighed. "Teapots, old postcards, a stuffed parrot named Roger, and also, bizarrely enough, a single bright pink slipper from Mrs. Donner's closet." Lukewarm's eyebrow rose enough to make the chief twitch with concern. "I don't know why they're only missing one slipper," the chief admitted, "but they're all upset and want their things back. The staff is worried about losing their funding if the families learn they can't keep valuables safe." Lukewarm breathed a small sigh of relief. He had been in the midst of chasing down some unscrupulous briefing about stolen hamsters, another weird case, but this one seemed more tangible. "I'll check it out," he declared. He turned to leave and promptly caught his coat in the doorway, spinning dramatically into the hallway. He regained his balance just in time to wave awkwardly at a passing detective, who was biting her lip to stop from laughing. "Thank you, Mulligan," the chief's voice called from the office, "and try not to knock over any of the residents." It was mid-morning when Lukewarm reached the retirement home. The lobby smelled faintly of lavender air freshener and old newspapers. He introduced himself to the receptionist, a sprightly woman with curly white hair named Rose, who eyed him with a mixture of grandmotherly concern and alarm. After filling out a quick visitor's form and almost losing his pen under a table, he headed down the hallway to meet the home's director, Mr. Kensington, a straight-backed fellow with watchful eyes. "Detective Mulligan," Mr. Kensington said, extending a hand. Lukewarm shook it, noticing the impeccably polished nails, which highlighted Lukewarm's own scuffed ones. "We appreciate you looking into this. Some of our residents are quite beside themselves." Lukewarm gave a lopsided grin. "I'll do my best. Could you walk me through exactly what's gone missing?" They ambled down the corridor, pictures of smiling residents lining the walls. "This is a quiet place," Kensington stressed. "We rarely have strangers skulking about, yet small items keep disappearing, and we have next to no actual leads." Lukewarm, attempting to appear attentive, periodically scribbled notes in a small pad, but then promptly tripped over a water fountain spout that protruded awkwardly. He stumbled, arms flailing, and banged into an Elvis Presley portrait. Kensington cleared his throat politely. "Are you all right?" Lukewarm tried to push the portrait straight on the wall again. "I'm fine," he replied, though his cheeks burned red. He soon got the chance to interview a handful of residents in the cozy community room, which was decorated with potted plants and crocheted blankets. The first was Mrs. Beatrice Donner, the victim of the stolen pink slipper. "I hate wearing mismatched footwear," she lamented, "but I refuse to wear a different pair. I've had that pair since my daughter gave them to me 3 Christmases ago." Lukewarm asked if she'd noticed anyone sneaking around her room. "Well," she said, knitting a pastel scarf, "I did hear a lot of bumping and muttering the night before last. I thought it was Mr. Harris next door again. He's always shaking furniture, claiming he hears squeaking in the walls." Mr. Harris was next, perched in his chair reading an old detective novel. Lukewarm tried to approach confidently, but saw a suspicious thread sticking out of the carpet and nearly landed face first in the fruit bowl. Mr. Harris coughed in surprise as grapes rolled across the floor. Lukewarm apologized profusely and sank into the seat opposite him. "I didn't see anything out of the ordinary," the older man claimed. "But the squeaking in the walls is real, mark my words. Something scuttling around in the ventilation rats, or ghosts, perhaps. Possibly ghost rats." He shrugged. "Maybe I'll set up a trap. Bees are the least of my worries." By the end of the day, Lukewarm had only found one suspicious clue: a single gray feather on the carpet near the corridor where a stuffed parrot once resided. According to Mrs. Snow, the parrot was a cherished keepsake from her beloved husband's travels. On closer inspection, though, the feather turned out to be from a pillow. Not exactly helpful. Packing up to leave, Lukewarm stepped outside the front doors, deep in thought. Could the culprit be an inside job? A staff member with a grudge? Or perhaps a cunning thief who found this location easy pickings? He was still pondering when he caught the toe of his left shoe on the doormat. He pitched forward and landed awkwardly on his knees, but as he braced himself against the ground, he spotted something that made him freeze. A small knitted doily poking out from the bushes. He carefully retrieved it. It had a flower pattern that looked similar to what he'd seen in Mrs. Donner's room. Maybe the thief had dropped it in a hurry. It wasn't conclusive proof, but it was a hint. The next morning found Lukewarm back at the station, uploading details into the investigation log. As he typed, he accidentally spilled half his coffee over his notes. Muttering under his breath, he tried to salvage the paper, balancing the coffee cup at a precarious angle. Detective Kayla Monroe, known for her precision, stepped quietly behind him. "Need help?" she asked in a tone that was more teasing than earnest. Lukewarm nodded sheepishly, and she gently slipped a fresh folder under the coffee-soaked pages, saving some of them from being ruined. In return, Lukewarm glowed with gratitude. He sometimes suspected Kayla was the only one who tried to see beyond his clumsiness. "Anything new on that retirement home theft?" she asked, skimming his notes. Lukewarm shrugged, spattering a new drop of coffee on his sleeve. "Just a doily, some random scuff marks, and an entire population of baffled senior citizens. I'm going back today, hoping to catch the thief in the act." He paused, then added, "I can't help thinking there's something weird about the items taken. Is it random, or is there a pattern?" Kayla didn't have a quick answer, but she nodded thoughtfully. "If you need backup, let me know. It's possible the items mean something to the thief." That afternoon, Lukewarm retraced his steps at the retirement home. He carefully questioned each staff member, balancing the desire to be thorough with the knowledge that one wrong step could send him flying. He interviewed a chatty nurse named Percy, who insisted that all the staff had been meticulously checking visitors' badges. "So no one could have just waltzed in," he said, handing Lukewarm a cup of watery tea that he promptly almost spilled. "Could a resident be behind it?" Lukewarm ventured. Percy shrugged. "Doubtful. They appreciate their own items too much to steal from others, and we'd notice if they were sneaking around at night. Then again, there's a lot that happens off-camera in the lounge." A small group of residents gathered in the lounge almost every evening for a card game. Lukewarm decided to observe them discreetly. He plopped himself on a velvet settee along the wall, trying not to look conspicuous. Within minutes, he managed to drop his notepad, which slid under the lounge's coffee table, forcing him to crawl on all fours to retrieve it. The seniors looked over at him in mild amusement before returning to their game. Rounds of laughter and occasional yelps of frustration filled the air. As the evening wore on, Lukewarm noticed one of the players, a woman named Clara, frequently stepped away from the table. She moved gracefully, unusually so for someone who complained of stiff joints earlier. He decided to follow quietly. Quietly, in Lukewarm's case, meant tiptoeing while somehow tripping over the leg of an antique sideboard. Though he landed with a low thud, Clara was too far down the hallway to notice. He rushed around the corner in time to see her open a supply closet briefly and slip back out. Had she been storing something there? He hurried to investigate. Inside the closet, shelves of toiletries and paper towels stood neatly stacked. Nothing looked obviously out of place. He didn't spot any teapots or stuffed parrots. Still, hunches were hunches, and he wasn't about to ignore one. A glimmer of metal caught his eye on the floor. As he bent down, Lukewarm banged his head on a shelf above him, which sent a cascade of paper towels toppling down. When he finally emerged from the mountain of rolls, he found what had caught his eye. A small silver spoon with engraved initials B.D. Mrs. Beatrice Donner. That was definitely stolen property, though either Clara had found it and stashed it, or she'd stolen it herself. Bristling with excitement, Lukewarm confronted Clara the next morning. He found her in the corridor, donning a bright pink tracksuit and tying her shoelaces. "Clara," he began, carefully positioning himself so he wouldn't stumble into her. "I found something I'd like to ask you about." She raised an eyebrow. "Certainly," she responded in a voice as sweet as a lullaby. He produced the silver spoon from an evidence bag. "This belongs to Mrs. Donner. I found it in the supply closet you visited last night." Clara didn't balk. Rather, she mirrored his serious expression with surprising poise. "I found it in the lounge a few days ago," she said. "I didn't want it to vanish, so I tucked it away until I could return it." "Is that a crime?" It was plausible. Maybe too plausible. "Why not just turn it in right away?" Lukewarm pressed. She shrugged, feigning innocence. "I tried, but Mrs. Donner wasn't around, and the staff office was closed for the night. Then I forgot. Maybe it's suspicious, but I'm not the thief." Lukewarm studied her face. She seemed genuine, at least on the surface. Still, he decided to keep an eye on her in case she was a smooth talker. Before he walked away, Clara gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "I heard you're trying to help us. Please do, this is a nice home. We don't need any more trouble." Later that day, Lukewarm made his way through the courtyard of the retirement home, where flower beds and bird baths offered a moment of tranquility. He spotted Mr. Harris in the shade, apparently dozing. Nearby, Mrs. Snow was humming quietly. Lukewarm inhaled the scent of lilacs, hoping some fresh air would help him connect the dots. One missing slipper, a teapot, a stuffed parrot, postcards, all seemingly random items. Then there was the silver spoon. What did it mean? Absently, he stared at a row of hedges. That's when he saw a small shape scuttle across the ground. A cat, perhaps? No, it was more like a ferret or a weasel, dragging something behind it. Luke walked closer, mindful of his footing. Before he could get too near, a startled squirrel leapt out of the shrub, squeaking indignantly. Unfortunately, the detective flinched and stepped onto a loose paving stone, causing him to tumble into the hedge. A cluster of branches scratched at him as he tried to stand. When he finally wobbled upright, he noticed something stuck to his shoe, a snippet of pink fabric that looked suspiciously like part of a slipper. He crouched again, examining the hedges carefully. Tucked around the base, near the trunk, was a small hole leading underneath the building. Could an animal be dragging these items inside? If so, it might explain the random nature of what was stolen, and the squeaking Mr. Harris complained about each night. But how would a small creature climb onto tables or shelves to snatch stuffed parrots? It seemed a stretch. Yet Lukewarm knew from experience that sometimes a story is stranger than expected. Deciding he needed a more direct approach, Lukewarm spent the next night staking out the hallway by Mrs. Donner's room. He propped himself behind a plastic fern, wishing it camouflaged him more effectively. Hours passed. Boredom set in, and his foot started falling asleep. He shifted positions, accidentally knocking the fern over with a sharp clatter. Cringing, he awaited footsteps, but no one emerged. Midnight came and went, still nothing. Eventually, the detective's eyelids grew heavy. At roughly 2 in the morning, a faint rustling noise broke the silence. Lukewarm jerked awake, leaning forward too far and nearly toppling again. Heart pounding, he crept along the corridor, zeroing in on the sound. He discovered a laundry cart parked near the lounge. Light footsteps tapped behind it. Slowly, ever so carefully, Lukewarm inched around the cart. To his shock, someone small bolted from the shadows, a scrawny teenage figure, carrying a bulging pillowcase. The kid dashed for the side exit, and Lukewarm gave chase, stumbling over the wheels of the cart in the process. Despite the fiasco, he managed to keep pace in the hallway. The culprit was within arm's reach, but Lukewarm's uncoordinated limbs proved a challenge. At the final moment, just as the intruder reached for the door, Lukewarm lunged. They both crashed to the floor, the pillowcase bursting open and scattering its odd contents across the tiles. Mr. Harris's old postcards, 2 mismatched slippers, 1 pink, 1 brown, a battered teapot with daisies painted on it, and the stuffed parrot named Roger. Lukewarm's head spun, but he had the culprit pinned. Panting, he flicked on the light. The thief was a wiry kid, maybe 14 or 15, with wide eyes and a look of panic. "Who are you?" Lukewarm demanded, breathless. The teen swallowed. My dad works in maintenance." He gestured vaguely at the name embroidered on his jacket. "I come here sometimes when he's on the night shift. I got bored." Lukewarm eyed the stolen items. "So, you started stealing?" With a shuddering sigh, the boy explained, "I know it sounds bad, but I wasn't stealing to keep them. I was trying to fix them up. The teapot had a chip, so I planned to repair it for the lady who loves it. The stuffed parrot had a tear in its side, the slippers were worn down, the postcards needed new corners. My dad taught me how to do little repairs, but I'm not the best with, conversation or making friends. I thought if I returned them all neat and fixed up, people would be happy." The confession poured out in a rush, but it got out of control. "You all thought it was a thief. I got scared." Lukewarm was stunned into silence for a moment. He observed the items scattered around them, noticing bits of tape, glue, and thread among them. The parrot did appear to have a newly patched seam. The postcards were stacked neatly with fresh edges. The pink slipper had a new sole almost sewn on. The detective swallowed a bubble of rising sympathy. "Kid, do you realize how much trouble this caused? These folks were worried. Some of them are fragile." The boy nodded, eyes brimming with shame. "I'm sorry." Chief Morris was less than amused when Lukewarm brought the kid in for a quick interview. However, after verifying the father's employment records and the boy's explanation, it became clear the situation was more mischief than criminal enterprise. The father apologized profusely for his son's antics, claiming he'd had no idea what was happening. He offered to reimburse the residents for any trouble. Lukewarm, though still slightly annoyed, couldn't help but admire the bizarre good intention behind the escapade. A day later, Lukewarm returned to Sunnyvale Retirement Home to ensure the items were returned to their rightful owners. As he entered the lounge, he slipped on the newly polished floor. To his relief, Kayla Monroe was there, catching his elbow before a full tumble ensued. She'd come along to help. Gaining composure, Lukewarm thanked her with a sheepish grin. Under his supervision, the various items were placed back in the resident's hands. Mrs. Donner nearly squealed when she saw her pink slipper, which now had a sturdy, non-slip sole. "It's perfect!" she exclaimed, turning it over in her wrinkled hands. Mr. Harris yelled triumphantly at the sight of his postcards, which were straighter and less frayed. Mrs. Snow hugged her stuffed parrot, Roger, tears of relief in her eyes. "He's practically like new. Even the teapot's chip had been nicely filled." A small hush fell over the lounge as the seniors realized, in a confusing way, that they'd gotten their beloved possessions back, better than before. Clara smiled at Lukewarm from across the room. eyebrows raised in admiration. "Caught your culprit?" she teased. He nodded. "Yes." "A young man with a big heart and a questionable understanding of how to go about good deeds." She chuckled softly, and Lukewarm found himself grinning back. The final part of the evening was a short ceremony in which the staff publicly thanked Lukewarm. Mr. Kensington, with his impeccable posture, handed him a small certificate, often given to volunteers, and gave a brief speech about how detective work sometimes came in unexpected forms. The seniors clapped politely, with a few hooting their approval. Lukewarm tried to bow graciously, but in the process his shoe snagged on a loose tile, sending him lurching sideways into the desert table. Thankfully, Kayla sprung forward to steady him before he flattened the lemon meringue pie. Amid awkward laughter, Lukewarm took a moment to imagine how he must look. A detective with a coffee stain on his trench coat, patched up sock, and a track record of landing face first on the floor. Yet at the heart of it all, he'd solved the puzzle, humming with satisfaction that at least these items and their owners were safe again. He realized that good detective work didn't always mean high-speed chases and shootouts. Sometimes it was about noticing the little details, chasing them down, and making sure no one got hurt, especially the lemon meringue. As the evening wound down, Lukewarm lingered sipping an iced tea. One of the residents, a cheerful man named Horace, placed a deck of cards on a table and waved him over. "Come on, detective. You look like you could use a break." Lukewarm, usually awkward in social situations, shuffled over, trying not to trip. Kayla joined as well, taking a seat beside him with a friendly shrug. A spirited game of gin rummy kicked off, and the group soon found themselves swapping stories. A ripple of laughter erupted every time Lukewarm dropped a card. Despite his clumsiness, there was something fulfilling about being part of that little circle. During the game, Mrs. Donner strolled up, still in her slippers. "Now, detective," she said, gently tapping his shoulder with her knitting needle, "I hear you found my slipper lying around. Is that how you found that doily too?" Lukewarm nodded. "Right, it was in a bush out front." She winked. "Well, I can't thank you enough. Wear and tear aside, these slippers mean the world to me." His chest warmed at the genuine gratitude in her voice. "I'm glad I could help," he murmured, accidentally knocking over the discard pile. Kayla snickered, picking it up neatly. Mr. Harris joined, waving his postcards fondly. "Now I can finally mail these to my granddaughter. I've been meaning to. That boy who took them, he sewed little ribbons on the edges to strengthen the corners. Clever boy. I almost forgive him. Almost." He gave a half grumble, half chuckle. "Is that the same boy who's been scuttling in the walls?" Lukewarm couldn't help but grin, remembering the old man's ghost rat theory. "Not quite," he replied. "But maybe if you see him again, you can say thanks. I think he just wanted to be useful." Way past bedtime, the crowd gently dispersed. Detective Mulligan and Kayla started walking back to their cars, stepping out into the balmy night air under the lamppost glow. Lukewarm was keenly aware of how quiet the night sounded compared to the earlier hustle and bustle. "Well, that's that," Kayla said softly, slotting her hands into her pockets. "Good job on this one." Lukewarm shrugged in modesty. "It wasn't exactly high-tier detective work. I basically tripped over half the evidence." Kayla laughed. "Tripped or not, you found it, and that's what matters. Besides, you gave those folks some closure. Doesn't that count?" He nodded, letting the satisfaction override his usual sense of self-consciousness. The two parted ways, and Lukewarm climbed into his battered old sedan with a soft sigh. In the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of himself, wild hair, crooked fedora, but also a hint of confidence he didn't often notice. Maybe, just maybe, there was something to the notion that people who stumbled into success had their own brand of skill. Milligan the next day, Lukewarm arrived at the station, bracing himself for possible teasing. Instead, he was greeted with mild applause. Chief Morris gave him a nod of approval. "Nice work, Mulligan. The press might want a quick statement, nothing big, just to show that the city's friendly detective answered the call." Lukewarm swallowed nervously. "Friendly detective? That's new." The chief's brow quirked. "Look, Mulligan, you may not have the style of a superstar, but you get results. And next time, try not to destroy any property in the process. We can't keep covering for all these broken doorknobs." Lukewarm tried a smile, shifting his fedora. He felt a strange sense of accomplishment. Sure, the thief had been a well-meaning teen, and yes, the case turned out to be minimal on the usual scale of criminal activities, but everything about it highlighted the best and worst of his technique. The best, in that he uncovered the culprit through dogged curiosity and improbable stumbling. The worst, in that he literally stumbled into everything. Still, if the result was a bit of closure and some newly repaired knickknacks that made folks happy, perhaps it was enough. At mid-morning, Kayla waved him over. "Want to grab coffee instead of wearing it?" she asked, a light smirk gracing her features. Lukewarm snorted in amusement. "Sure. I'll try not to scald any ongoing investigations." They left the office, heading to the cafe across the street. As they walked, Kayla asked if he'd realized that sometimes the biggest mysteries are solved by simply paying attention to the overlooked corners of everyday life. Lukewarm nodded, remembering all the times he'd hit the floor for the smallest clue. "True," he said thoughtfully. "Maybe we trip over them because we're not afraid to look where no one else does." In the cafe, he managed to get his coffee without incident. Victory in small things, he mused. The aroma of freshly ground beans was comforting, and Kayla's presence was a welcome break from the usual chuckles at his expense. "So," she teased, "any more big plans for the day?" He shrugged with a smile. "Might check on that hamster theft case. I hear the little critters were abducted for some kind of bizarre pet pageant," Kayla snickered. "If it's anything like this retirement home job, you'll be knocking over hamster cages in no time." Lukewarm lifted his paper cup in a mock toast. "Then I'd better come prepared with an extra large net." They both laughed, setting the coffee cups down on the small table. For once, Lukewarm didn't knock anything over as he did. In that instant, he felt the delicate possibility of progress, both personal and professional, flicker in the air. Maybe the world would always see him as accident-prone, but that didn't mean he couldn't excel in his own peculiar way. Smiling to himself, he savored another sip of coffee, reflecting on the events that led him there: a pink slipper, a stuffed parrot, a chipped teapot, and a handful of postcards. Meant so ordinary that they might never make headlines, but to the folks at Sunnyvale, they were treasures, and ensuring their safe return had meaning. Even if it involved a detective who tripped over half the evidence in the end, he had delivered good news for those who needed it. When they left the cafe, Kayla gave him a friendly pat on the arm and headed back to the station. Lukewarm lingered on the sidewalk for a moment beneath the bright sun, feeling the warmth on his face. He tilted his head skyward, letting the fedora slip a bit. Another case closed, another day's worth of comedic mishaps behind him. And with each stumble, he was learning how to land just a little more gracefully.